Okay, let's take up the picture analysis, or let's review what you might have said in this picture analysis to help you understand what you should look for when you're analyzing pictures. Okay, so let's go to our first image here. So this is our image. We take a look at it. It says the last spike of the Canadian Pacific Railway. So you can see the railway here. Right? Look at all the people in the picture. So who is in the picture? Well, what do I see? I see men in top hats. So upperclassmen. What else do I see? I see working men. Okay. So let's move on. That's about all, because that's about all I see right here. Now let's see what is the picture of? What is in the picture? Well, the picture is of the last spike, of the Canadian Pacific Railway. So it's one man in top hat putting in the last spike while others look on. Where was this picture taken? Well, we know it's on the Canadian Pacific Railway. So I don't know exactly where this picture is taken, but I can assume, looking at it, I see the trees and I see that it's from the Pacific Railway. So I know it's on the west coast of Canada. Okay, and I'm going to make an inference that it's probably BC. When was this picture taken? So when was this picture taken? What is the historical context for the picture? What are the major events happening at the time of the picture? So the Canadian Pacific Railway, the last spike. Well, what are some clues I can look at for determining when this picture is taken? Well, I can look at their clothing. And I remember from our turn of the century discussion that three-piece suits were very popular, cloth caps were very popular, so I can tell that this is probably late 1800s. What I can also do is look, I did give you a little bit of a cheat here. I gave you a link, and you can go to these links and read up about the last spike and find the information about the last spike of in the Canadian Pacific Railway. So we can go here and look, I've gotten even more information. So it is in the District of Columbia. And then we have the exact date here. We have 1885. So I can put in 1885. What do I know was happening at this time? Well, I know there was a big class divide between working class and upper class. I know technology was developing, transportation is developing. So people rely on railways. So that can help you with the historical context, knowing the time period. Now we scroll down to here. Why was this picture taken? Why would the photographer want that exact photo? What is it trying to convey or tell us? So looking at this picture, it is very staged. We have the working men here who probably have been putting in all the spikes in this railway. And then we have the one man with the big white beard and the top hat actually putting in the last spike to look like he's done the work. But we know realistically he did not do the work. So we know that, or we can infer that it's a staged photo, especially since it's for the last spike. So it looks staged, and it's very ceremonial because, when they're starting to dig for a new foundation of a new building. There's usually a big ceremony for it. So there's a big ceremonial feeling to it. So why would the photographer want that exact photo? Well, it's staged, ceremonial, to show the end of an event. It's a big, important event. So again, okay, why? Why is it historically relevant and significant? Infer what it can tell us about this point in history or the people involved in history. So why is it historically relevant? Well, it's relevant. I can spell. Because it's the last spike, the railway. So the railway is completed and service can begin. It very much is a symbol for transportation this time and connection. So a railway was how you could travel from one end of the country to the other, and it was how you would get around because cars are slowly starting to be developed, but at this point in 1885, it's not something that everyone can afford or everyone has or is common. So railways became a huge connection for the country. So infer what it can tell us about this point in history or people involved. Now, I'm going to raise a point that's kind of something that you probably might, well, maybe you thought of this, but you probably didn't notice. Who is not in this picture? Do you remember what we talked about when we talked about the turn of the century and the Chinese immigrants and how Chinese immigrants were brought in to work on the Canadian Pacific Railway? There are no Chinese workers in this picture. Everyone is white. So even in who, I can add in who is not there. I can say no Chinese workers represented. So if I go back to here with, and for what it tells us about this point in history, the people involved in history, we definitely have moments of discrimination, shows lack of representation, and discrimination against the Chinese community. And those who really built the railway, not that man in the top hat who was the owner of the railway, he probably did nothing to the physical building part except for this. And realistically, he probably posed for the photo and then another man went in and actually laid the last spike. So wonder, what questions do you have about this picture? Well, let's think of some questions you might have. Why? It could be something like, why are the Chinese workers not represented? Who else is in there? There's no women. Were no women involved in the building? Railway. Was this really the last spike? Or is it just a ceremonial thing? So that's how you could examine this photo. It's important to look at why the photo was taken. We can get a lot of hints from the background, when it was taken, the clothing. We can look at the setup of how staged the photo is, and then you look at exactly who's in the photo and who's not there. So let's look at this photo here. So we see it says June 1900, Toronto and Yonge Street, the fall of, I believe, Pretoria celebration. And again, you can click the link and go to find more information about the photo there. If you did not, that's okay, because when we analyze pictures and when we analyze historical sources, we tend to make a lot of inferences based on the knowledge we have to try to fill in the blanks for history. So who is in this picture? Well, we see a large crowd of people, men and women. Let's comment on their clothing. They all look pretty nicely dressed. There's a lot of bikers in the photo. So I think that pretty much covers who is there. We also, we see children in the photo as well, because there's a couple of kids and there's a kid right there. What is the picture of? Well, we know from the title, it's Yonge Street in Toronto. We know it's for a celebration. The fall of Pretoria. Now, if you go to that link, you find out a little more information. If you Google the fall of Pretoria, you might find a little more information. It has to do with the Boer War that was going on at this point in time. What is in the picture? Well, we see people on bikes. We see a gathering of crowds. We see horse-drawn buggies. We see shops, because if you look up here, we can see furs. We see an office building here. These all look like shops here. A lot of buildings, big city buildings. I also see a lot of flags here. So a lot of British flags. Lots of British flags. And okay, and then let's look at the road here. Doesn't really look like a dirt road. It kind of looks like a cobblestone road. And there is tracks in it with tracks. So with cable car, that tells us that, you know what, there is definitely some other forms of transportation that we probably can't see, like trolleys or cable cars. And we also see the cables above. Cables above road. Where was this picture taken? Well, we know where it was, in Yonge Street, Toronto. When was this picture taken? We know from the title. It was taken in 1900. So we know at this time, because if you Googled Fall of Pretoria, you would know the Boer War. There's a war in South Africa at the time. What's the historical context? Well, we can look and we see there's a lot of British flags. So what does that tell us about context? So Canada is very much tied to its British ancestry. You might have also talked about context with transportation, context with furs. So like today, wearing fur can be seen as something not right. So like a faux pas, like you don't wear furs. People tend to wear fake furs instead. But back then, furs were very common. So that tells us something about the context, and that fabrics were very different and the values of people were different. So we'll leave that for now, but you might have other points. Why was the picture taken? Well, we know it's for the celebration. Fall of Pretoria. So it says why would the photographer want that exact photo? What is he trying to convey? So let's make an inference. I think it's meant to convey a big celebration, so a positive reaction. It's an important event for the city and the population of Canada. Again, you might have other answers. That's okay too. If you aren't sure if your answers fit exactly, feel free to email me and we'll go over it. So why is it historically relevant and significant? Infer what it can tell us about this point in history and the people involved. Well, people supported the actions and wars of the British Empire, because we are celebrating a victory within the Boer War for the British here. And then I wonder what are some questions we have. Maybe if you don't know about the Boer War, you can ask how long did the war last? How long was the celebration? How did people celebrate? Because we see people gathering, but we don't really see exactly what they're doing to celebrate. Are they going out and going to get a drink? Are they talking to one another? Are they dancing in the street? How do people celebrate? So that's a question you can ask as well. Again, questions, any questions that come to mind about your poster, the photo. And then here we have our last photo. So this is an interesting one. Who is in the photo? Some of you might have said 2 boys, or maybe a boy and a girl if you're not sure. 2 kids. I am going to tell you now, if you look at the title, it's going to give you a bit of a hint. It's Thomas More. So it is 1 child. Okay? So Thomas More. If you go to this link, you will find out a little more about Thomas More. So let's go and let's learn about Thomas More. So he was 8 years old. I believe he was from, he was Cree, from the Cree First Nation. And he was enrolled in residential school. So we can add that information. So he was Thomas More. We know he was 8 years old. We know he was from a Cree Nation. This nation. What is this picture of? A boy posing. What is in this picture? Well, we see him in, he is dressed. Let's say he is dressed as he would be for the Cree Nation. So in his natural or native dress. Traditional, so I'll say traditional dress. And then we see him here in a suit. Then he is in a suit. We also see a plant, something that might be like a hat or a bag at the side there. In the one picture, we see a fur. Fur is in the background. Again, this is just observations of things that you see in the photo, okay? Where was this picture taken? Well, let's look at this picture. These photos are very staged in the fact that if someone's standing in a pose, they are probably taken at a studio. Maybe this one's outside, but I am going to infer that they were probably taken in a studio setting. So maybe a studio, but we know it's a staged setting. And well, we can infer that it's a staged setting, because I don't know about you, but I don't see many people just going out and leaning against a pillar and someone walks by and takes a random photo of them. It's very staged. When was this picture taken? So let's go back here. Let's see if we can find some more information about when the picture was taken. Okay, so it doesn't give us an exact date when it was taken. We see that tells us a little bit about residential schools. So I'm going to just say, because I'm going to give a little more broad picture, we're going to say during time of residential schools. And because it's black and white, we know it's probably early 1900s. We know it's before color photos come out. And because we have the background that we know he was in a residential school, that's also a part of our historical context for this time. So we know the Indian Act was governing the First Nations. And we know residential schools. And how they worked at this point. So, why was the picture taken? Okay, so this you might have to make some inferences on. I'm going to give you a little background into this photo, because why would the photographer want to take this exact photo? This is very much a before and after photo. We see them today all the time. You see them with weight loss ads, you see them with beauty makeovers, anything. But this is a before and after photo of the time. We see before. We see Thomas More in traditional First Nation Cree dress. We see him, if you look closely, he's actually holding a gun, so we can add that into what's in the photo. Holding a gun. So we see the before. We see the after here, where he is in a suit. He has short hair, similar expressions on his face. If you look at the exposure in the photo, here his skin color is darker than it is here. He's almost portrayed as lighter in this photo. Whether that is a mistake or on purpose, we don't know. But it's very much a before and after photo to show the civilization of, at the time they would have used the word Indian. So they are taking children from this uncivilized, what they would have said, savage. So we see the gun, it's kind of scary, lots of furs, deemed different. And they've put him in residential school, and he has come out as an English gentleman. So it is very much a before and after photo. Now, again, your inferences might have been very different. I would love to hear what your inferences were, but I'm going to give you some context into here. So it was taken as a before and after photo. Trying to show the good, putting good in quotation marks, of residential schools. Because again, at this point in time, residential schools are seen as something that aren't good and something that helps First Nations children. We know now that is not the case. We know how rampant abuse was. We know that it can be seen as a form of genocide, trying to get rid of a whole culture of people. But at this point in time, in the historical context, in the historical perspective, it was to show the good of residential schools, to show how they civilize children. Why is it historically relevant and significant? Infer what it can tell us about this point of view in history and how, or the people involved. So it tells us essentially how people thought about residential schools. They thought it was positive. So residential schools, I apologize, guys. My typing is terrible today. Schools were seen a good thing. First Nations were seen as uncivilized and scary. So that tells us there. And then we know that it tells us about the people involved. It tells us Thomas was forced through residential school and possibly incurred abuse and horrible treatment. And questions that we have about the photo, what happened to Thomas? What was his experience like? So any questions that you have, even about the photo, maybe why was he holding the gun? Why would they have a plant there is even a question. Anything. So that's how you want to examine photos, guys. You want to break it down by essentially who, what, where, when for the photos. And again, I don't expect you to know all the background to the photos. I have given you some hints with the links, but a lot of this is inference, being guessing, educated guessing, and making inferences. And that's what history can be, is because we don't always know the full story, but we use things like historical context and clues to actually put together pieces of history. Okay, so if you have any questions about this at all or the picture analysis, let me know.